She inherited more wealth than most dynasties, more than $1 billion in today's terms. Yet the world would soon call her the poor little rich girl. Her fortune promised invincibility, but it could not shield her from loneliness, scandal, or ruin. How does an heiress with limitless resources lose everything except her vulnerability? The answer begins with the day power was placed in her hands. Barbara Hutton's inheritance was not a sudden windfall, but the result of a carefully constructed legal framework. After the death of her grandmother, Jenny Woolworth, in 1924, a trust was created to manage Barbara's one-third share of the Woolworth fortune, valued at $28 to $30 million at the time, or the equivalent of over $600 million today. Her father, Franklin Hutton, a prominent stockbroker, was named sole trustee. He held sweeping authority over the assets, investing conservatively and selling off stocks before the 1929 crash, which preserved the core of the estate through the worst of the Great Depression. The trust's terms were straightforward. Barbara would receive limited distributions as a minor, but the principal remained locked away until her 21st birthday. There were no elaborate restrictions, no safeguards against future extravagance or exploitation. By 1933, the trust had grown to more than $40 million, and a New York court, bound by the original agreement, ordered that the entire sum be transferred to her, free of conditions. The moment she came of age, every barrier between Barbara and her fortune vanished. This structure, designed to protect a child's inheritance, instead handed an immense fortune to a young woman with limited guidance and no meaningful oversight. The legal mechanisms that had preserved her wealth for nearly a decade now placed unimaginable resources directly in her hands, setting the foundation for a life defined by both privilege and risk. Barbara Hutton's childhood unfolded behind the closed doors of Fifth Avenue mansions and European hotels, but comfort and grandeur did little to soften the loss that shaped her earliest years. In 1917, at just 4 years old, she lost her mother, Edna, to illness. The official cause was mastoiditis, and later alternative theories circulated. Her father, Franklin Hutton, was often absent, absorbed in business and personal affairs. Barbara's world became one of governesses, tutors, and distant relatives. Her upbringing was defined by privilege, yet marked by an absence of warmth and constancy. Isolation became a quiet companion. Biographers describe a child more comfortable with books and her cousin Jimmy Donahue than with the crowds that would one day gather in her name. She learned early that affection was conditional and that trust could be fleeting, even among those paid to care for her. The emotional distance of her guardians was matched by the physical distance of her father, who was rarely present for birthdays or holidays. When Barbara made her public debut in 1930, the world took notice. Her coming-out ball at the Ritz-Carlton was a spectacle of opulence. 4 orchestras, 2,000 bottles of champagne, and 1,000 guests, each served a 7-course supper. Newspapers, searching for irony in the depths of the Great Depression, christened her the poor little rich girl. The phrase captured the contradiction at the heart of her story: immense fortune, yet a childhood shadowed by solitude. As the orchestra played and the cameras flashed, Barbara stood at the center of a dazzling world, already set apart by the very wealth that was meant to secure her happiness. A world measured in acres and carats and the length of private runways unfolded before Barbara Hutton. She presided over an empire of tangible splendor, palaces, fleets, and collections that rivaled those of crowned heads. In the hills above Cuernavaca, Mexico, a 30-acre estate rose from the landscape, designed in the style of a Japanese palace. Its lacquered doors opened onto gardens with imported stones and rare orchids, tended by teams of horticulturists. The estate's blueprints revealed not just a home, but a self-contained universe: guest villas, reflecting pools, and servants' quarters arranged with the precision of a royal compound. Across the Atlantic, Winfield House in London stood as one of the largest private residences in the city. Purchased in 1936, it boasted 58 rooms, a ballroom, and grounds so vast they later became the official residence of the U.S. ambassador. In New York, Paris, and Tangier, her addresses read more like a diplomat's itinerary than a private citizen's holdings. Travel was a matter of preference, not necessity. Her roster of aircraft included a converted DC-3 and later a sleek private jet. Yachts waited in Mediterranean harbors, each staffed by a full crew. Curators managed her art and jewelry, pieces by Faberge, Cartier, and Van Cleef, cataloged in ledgers as if they belonged to a museum. Yet for all this abundance, the scale of her possessions created its own demands. Every estate required constant attention. Every collection a staff of specialists, every journey a retinue. Barbara Hutton moved through these gilded spaces as their solitary owner, surrounded by beauty, but always alone at the center of her domain. Servants moved quietly through the corridors of Barbara Hutton's homes, tending to every detail with the precision expected of royal households. At Winfield House, a staff of nearly 50 maintained the lawns, polished silver, and prepared ballrooms for gatherings that drew dukes, diplomats, and film stars. In Mexico, gardeners, chefs, and maids orchestrated daily life on the Cuernavaca estate, their routines as elaborate as the gardens they kept. Schedules revolved around social calendars that spanned continents, with luncheons in London, galas in Paris, and polo matches on private fields. Yet beneath the glamour, companionship proved elusive. Barbara's longing for connection played out in a series of marriages, each shaped by the world she inhabited. Her first husband, Prince Alexis Medivani, arrived with old-world titles and expensive tastes. Within months, her fortune underwrote polo ponies, jewels, and a lifestyle that rivaled European courts. Cary Grant, her third husband, brought Hollywood charm but struggled to bridge the distance between her world and his. Artist Raymond Doan, who styled himself a prince, represented a final, almost desperate attempt at fairy tale belonging. 7 marriages in all, each celebrated with lavish gifts and extravagant ceremonies, each ending in separation. Friends and biographers would later describe a pattern. Barbara searched for security in the arms of men dazzled by her fortune, only to find herself more isolated after every union. The scale of her household staff and the grandeur of her parties could not disguise the solitude that lingered at the heart of her relationships. In the end, her quest for love became another avenue through which her wealth was both displayed and diminished. The unraveling of Barbara Hutton's fortune did not come as a single blow, but through a steady sequence of decisions, legal maneuvers, and betrayals that drained her wealth over decades. In 1938, under pressure from her second husband, Count Haugwitz Reventlow, Barbara renounced her American citizenship, a move intended to shield her assets from U.S. taxes, but one that triggered public outrage. Headlines declared her a traitor. Woolworth stores faced boycotts, and telegrams poured in from workers demanding justice. Behind the scenes, lawyers and advisors, some trusted with protecting her interests, instead orchestrated deals that chipped away at her holdings. Records from the era point to questionable transactions, particularly involving her longtime lawyer, Graham Madison. The costs of divorce settlements, legal fees, and the maintenance of multiple estates quietly mounted, while trusted advisors steered her through a maze of contracts and obligations that favored their own gain. The erosion of her fortune was not dramatic, but methodical, measured in assets sold, jewels auctioned, and trust funds quietly diminished. After the loss of her only son, Lance, in 1972, Barbara Hutton withdrew from the world she once commanded. The vast estates, the retinue of servants, and the endless parties faded into memory. She chose to live out her final years in a suite at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel in Los Angeles. The rooms were elegant, but the scale was a fraction of what she once called home. Days passed in quiet repetition. Staff brought meals to her door. She often refused to leave her bed, cocooned by heavy curtains and silence. Visitors were rare. The phone seldom rang. Her health faltered, years of anorexia and heartbreak now visible in her frail frame. She spent money on fleeting companionship, sometimes inviting strangers for company, but the sense of emptiness lingered. The fortune that once bought palaces now paid for solitude. In the end, Barbara Hutton's world had contracted to a single suite. The echoes of her former life softened to a hush. Today, generational wealth still vanishes in a single lifetime, proof that even billions offer no shield from loss or loneliness. Barbara Hutton's story reminds us that inheritance grants access, not immunity. In a world chasing fortune, her legacy warns that nothing material is ever truly permanent. Thank you for watching.